Okay, we are finally there. We are going to catch up what we missed. We're going to begin from Kuf Chaf Beis Amud Beis on the bottom. I'm not sure exactly where we dropped off on Kuf Chaf Beis Amud Beis, but that's where we're going to pick up. These are the three Amudim that we missed over the first days of Sukkot. Hold on to your hats. Let's go. Notel Adam Korna. So, a person's allowed to take a hammer. Amar Rav Yehuda Korna Shel Agozim with Fatzeh Bas Agozim. Person allowed to take a hammer that's been designated for to open nuts. Aval Shana Pachim Lo. You're not allowed to take a blacksmith's hammer. Kesavar Davash Machla Isser Afilu Tzarach Gufa Asar. Rav Yehuda holds that when something is primarily dedicated to something which is forbidden, even for the sake of its use in a permissible capacity, cannot be done. In other words, there's a hammer over here, which is a blacksmith's hammer. It's obviously used typically for a blacksmith, but you could use it to break nuts. Rav Yehuda holds, too bad. Davar Shel Machla Isser. If it's something which is designated for a prohibited purpose, you cannot use it for a permitted purpose. Whereas, therefore, the only hammer you're allowed to use is a hammer that is designated for breaking nuts. Amalei Rabba El Miat. If that's so, Sivik Tani, the end of our Mishnah, which said if it's harachas, vesa mazle malges lasis lava katan, a winnowing shovel or pitchfork to put food on it for a child, rachas umalges mim yachle lekatan, a winnowing shovel or pitchfork, which are in that same Mishnah, which said you're allowed to use it, are those things that people designate? Those are things which are set aside for children. A winnowing fork, a winnowing fork is not like a little tiny baby fork. Winnowing fork is this huge thing, right? Okay, this camera's not big enough. Huge. Okay, and so that's clearly not what we're talking about. Rabba says no. We're talking about a hammer, a blacksmith's hammer, which you're allowed to use, even though it's set aside for a blacksmith. It's called a klish malachal isser, which Rabba says is allowed to be used for a davar mutter. So you're allowed to use a hammer, which is used for nails or a blacksmith or whatever, to break nuts with it. Okay, Kasavar, he holds davar malachal isser litzarach gufa mutter, something which is ordinarily used for something which is primarily forbidden. You're allowed to use it for a permitted purpose. You're allowed to use a screwdriver to open a locked door. You're allowed to use a hammer which is designated for nails to break nuts. Okay, Esvei Baila Rabba. Abaya asks a question on Rabba's approach. Medocha, a mortar in which garlic is usually crushed. Okay. If it contains garlic in it, it's allowed to be moved on Shabbos. But if not, it may not be moved. Okay, so if there is garlic in it, it's allowed to be moved. But if not, then it's not able to be moved. Amarle Hamani, whose opinion is this? Reb Nechemia, it's Reb Nechemia the Amar ein kli nitel el tzorach tashmisho. Reb Nechemia, right? So what do we see from this brisa? We see from this brisa that if it's something which it has garlic in it, therefore it's a kli, a utensil which is being used to carry garlic, then it's allowed to be used. But if it doesn't have garlic in it, it's a kli shamlachto le'isser. It's usually used for crushing things. It's clearly saying you're not allowed to use it for a permitted purpose. There's a question on Rabba's approach who says a kli shamlachto le'isser, a utensil which is normally used for a forbidden purpose, could be used for a permitted purpose. This brisa says not so. So Amalei Hamani Reb Nechemia Hidamar ein kli nital tzorach tashmisho. No, this is not a problem because there is definitely one Tana by the name of Reb Nechemia who holds that a utensil that he holds that a utensil is only allowed to be used for the sake of its designated function. But Reb Nechemia is an outlier, it's a minority view, and Rabbah says therefore there's no question. Another question though. Vishavin, both Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel agree. If a person chops meat on the pestle, okay, it was already used, the pestle is no longer able to be used, and this is Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, no longer Nechemia. So several Reb Nechemia. So first Rabbah says, well, maybe Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, this Mishnah is according to Reb Nechemia within the view of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. That would be one answer. However, then he heard from Rav Chisda Chanina, Bar Shalemia, who said in the name of Rab, that all agree regarding spindles, clothespress, and mallets, that they cannot be moved at all on Shabbos. Why? Since people care about these items. Okay, these are items which you can't mess around with. In other words, a hammer, if you use a hammer to break some nuts, okay, nothing's going to happen to the hammer. The hammer could be used today. To use a screwdriver to open a lock, no problem. But there are certain things like a spindle, clothespress. These are things which no one's going to go ahead. You put those up on a top shelf. You're not going to go ahead and let the children play with it. You're not going to let them go ahead and use it for something else, because if it gets a little bit ruined, it's ruined entirely. And so these are things which you set aside a place for them. Haninami, these two, the pestle, the mortar, the pestle, the last two questions that Abai asked on Rabbi, you could also say, these are things which person designates a space for them, and therefore these are things which are considered muksa all the time. It's called muksa machmas chisaron kis. It's muksa due to the fact that it could cause a loss in something which you're afraid, it's something which can cause a financial loss. So, in other words, a hammer is something that you're not so careful about, and therefore, even though it's typically designated for a forbidden purpose, you're allowed to use it for a permitted purpose. Whereas when it comes to something like the spindle or anything, which even though you could find a permitted use for it, but since it's something which you normally designate, you put away, you don't want people to mess around with it, it's therefore muksa machmas chisaron kis, and it can't be used. So we just had sukkah. So a good example of this is an esrog on Shabbos. So even though you could say, hey, I could use it to, I don't know, for some other purpose, I use it for decor. Some people like having like esrogim in the middle of their table for decor. I can't move it on Shabbos of Chol Hamoed. Why? Because people are very careful about their esrog to make sure it doesn't fall, doesn't break, doesn't get any blemishes, and therefore that's muktzah machmas chisar kis. It's something you put on a shelf. Anything you put away, that's muktzah machmas chisar kis, and therefore you would not you're not allowed to move it for a permitted purpose. Okay, Itmar. We learned it was stated. Rav Chia bar Abba Rav Yochanan Kornish Shel Zahav Shaninu. In our Mishnah, which spoke about a hammer, it's regarding a goldsmith's hammer. Rav Shimon bar Abba Amar Kornish Shel B'Sam Shaninu. We learned in regards to a spice maker's hammer. Okay, so what's the difference between these two opinions? Madam or Divsam, the one who says that it's a spice maker's hammer is the hammer that we're talking about in our Mishnah that you're allowed to use for breaking nuts. Kol shkein Zahavim. For certainly you're allowed to use a hammer, a goldsmith's hammer. Madam Shel Zahavim, the one who says a goldsmith's hammer, but a spice hammer, maybe if you hold a gold hammer is allowed, you might not hold a spice hammer is allowed, because a gold hammer, even if it gets a little bit out of shape, you can just hit it on the big metal thing. I forget what it's called, and reshape it very quickly. Whereas when it comes to a spice maker's hammer, if it smells, but you use it for the wrong thing, it starts to smell bad, and therefore it's going to be not good for the spices, and therefore maybe spice hammer, you say goldsmith's hammer, yes, spice hammer, no. Okay, further in the Mishnah said, Vesakush Vesakarkar, a spindle or weaver's reed to spear fruit with it. Tanar Banus. It's taught in the Brisa, Paga Shetmana B'Tevin, an unripe fig that was buried in straw in order to make it ripe. So before Shabbos, you put an unripe fig into straw, and that helps. It fell off the tree before it was fully ripe. You put it in straw, and apparently that helps it get ripe. And a cake that's been buried in coals before Shabbos. If part of it is uncovered, you're allowed to pick it up. Okay, and if not, you're not allowed to move it. Even if it's completely covered by the coals or completely covered by the straw, you could stick a spear in it, and the straw coals will fall off by themselves. The halachas follows Rav Elazar ben Tadai, who says you're allowed to stick the spear in, even though you're going to cause everything to move around when you pull out the spear. That's okay. Remember to say Rav Nachman, that Rav Nachman, who says we go like Rav Elazar ben Tadai, seems like he's saying moving indirectly is not moving. However, Rav Nachman, a radish that was plucked and then buried again, right? Back in the day, they didn't have refrigerators, so how did they keep things cool? They would put them in the ground. So you have a radish. The radish is like this shape, right? So if you put it in this way, when you pull it out, nothing's going to happen to the soil. If you put it in backwards, this way, then when you pull it out, if you put it in this way, right? And therefore, if you put it in this way, then it's okay, because nothing's going to happen when you pull it out. But if you put it in this way, right? So the wide part is on the bottom, so you're pulling out the narrow end, you're going to be moving all the dirt. So if it's upside down, right? If it's upside down, it's going to be forbidden. Hadar Bey, Rav Nachman Mehi. Rav Nachman tracked the ruling and holds that you're right. You are allowed to move things in an indirect fashion. This is the halacha. The halacha is that if let's say I have something in my freezer, I have some muktzah items in my freezer. We're going to see later on that meat, raw meat, according to many poskim, is muktzah, and you have in your freezer ice pops you want to give your child, and the ice pop. So so you're allowed to move the ice pop in a way that even though it causes the meat to fall off of it, even though it's causing I'm moving the ice pop directly with my hand, and the meat's on top of it, so the meat falls down. That's okay. It's called tiltul min hatzad. It's called indirect moving, and that is allowed on Shabbos, and that's the way we paskin. Machat sheyad litzba, hand needle to remove a splinter with it. Shalach le Rav Breder Rav Levi Yosef Lamdin Rabbeinu. Machat shnitel charar uksamahu. What's the halacha with a sewing needle whose eye or point was removed? Does it lose its status as a utensil or not? Okay, so Amrlei Tinisua, we learned in the Mishnah. Machat sheyad litzba sakots. It says in the Mishnah, hand needle to remove a splinter with it. When you have a splinter, who cares if it has a hole at the top of the needle to put a thread in? That's meaningless. Whether it has an eye in it or not. Esvei, however, Rav Yosef's opinion is challenged. Rava, the son of Rabba, challenge of Yosef. The Mishnah says that a needle whose eye or point has been removed is tahar. Okay, so we see that when a needle loses its sharpness at the edge or loses its hole at the top, it no longer is called a utensil, right? The notion of a utensil becoming tahar is it was impure at one point, and then it loses its, when it no longer is called a utensil, then it becomes pure, right? So let's say you have a cup which is impure, and then you break the cup, it becomes pure now. So similarly, the Mishnah says a needle which was impure, and then the top or the bottom was broken off, it becomes pure. So Amar Abaye, Tuma Shabbos Karmas, why are you asking a question from Tuma to Shabbos? Tuma kli ma'aseh b'inan. When it comes to Tuma, what's needed is a vessel. Lin Shabbos needed a chazi b'inan. Regarding Shabbos, what you need is something that's fit to use. So who cares if it's called a vessel or not called a vessel? A needle whose eye was removed, the top part of the needle was removed, it's still fit for remove a splinter. Right? And the bottom being removed, that clearly he agrees. Abaye agrees. If the bottom is removed, you can't remove a splinter from a dull needle. But the top, the eye, who cares? Rava says, no. It's actually a good question. If something is not considered a utensil regarding impurity and purity, we apply the same principles to Shabbos, and therefore say it's not going to be good for Shabbos either. Okay, however, this is a challenge. A needle, whether it has an eye or it does not have an eye, can be moved on Shabbos. And the only time they said that the piercing makes a difference is for Tumah. So this brisa clearly goes against Rava. Rava said no, the two are the same, and now this brisa says clearly not the way. Targumei Abaye libid Rava is beautiful, by the way. They're arguing with Abaye, and Abaye now answers for his the one arguing with him, right? Abaye answers for Rava, okay? Right, Rava was the one asking on Abaye, and now there's a question now on Rava. Abaye says, the question on Rava is not a good question. I'll tell you why. Begol me'askinan. The brisa, you could learn the brisa talking about unfinished needles. And there, we'll say that if a person was in the process of making needles, okay, or in the store making needles, then sometimes when you're making needles, you could decide, am I going to make these for sewing needles, or we may put them in the first aid kit to be used to remove splinters. And therefore, in the first stage, if it's in that the initial stage when it did not yet have a hole in it, it was the early stages of the processing. There, when it comes, you stop then. For Shabbos, it's going to be considered a utensil since it could be used as a first aid kit, as part of a first aid kit to remove splinters. Whereas regarding Tumah, it's not a utensil. But once it's made, once it's made, it was a finished needle, and then the eye or the point was removed, it's true a person could theoretically save it for splinters, but typically when a needle that you use for sewing breaks, the top of it, the hole breaks the top, you throw it out, and therefore it's no longer considered a utensil, and therefore it is mukta, right? So basically so there's two opinions over here. One opinion is saying, Rava is saying, Abaye is saying that when it comes to Shabbos and Tumah have nothing to do with one another, and therefore on Shabbos, if the top of the needle is missing, it's still a good utensil since it could be used to remove a splinter. And Rava says that no, Tumah and Shabbos are the same. What about this brisa, which seems to say not that way? There we're talking about a case where it was not yet fully processed, and therefore, since it wasn't fully processed, it still is in a situation where it could theoretically be used as a splinter-removing needle. Once it's been made and then it breaks, no one's going to save it. It's a broken thing, and therefore people are going to throw it out. Okay, asuve yenuka, straightening out the limbs of an infant on Shabbos, Nachman Asur Rav Sheshes Shari. Okay, so basically, when a child is born, sometimes the limbs are a little bit out of place. We're not talking about a case where it's dangerous. If it's dangerous, of course, you can do it on Shabbos. Rav Nachman says it's not allowed to be done. It's fixing something. Rav Shesha says it is allowed to be done. Rav Nachman Aminallah, what's my source for saying that it is forbidden? It's not. We learned in our Mishnah, in Osin, in a different Mishnah, peak to Vizin b'Shabbos. You're not allowed to take an emetic on Shabbos. Okay, so just like, and that's a form of repairing the body. A body is like bloated, and so you take an emetic to vomit, and so you're not allowed to do that on Shabbos. And so too, you can't fix a body by straightening out the limbs. Rav Sheshes hasam lav orche hacha orche. He says no. If I take an emetic, that's abnormal. Like you don't normally take an emetic to vomit, but over here the limbs are out of shape. To shape them into normal shape, that's allowed. Rav Sheshes manamina. Where's my source? It's not machad shliad lidabos hakotz. It says you're allowed to remove a splinter. Rav Nachman hasam pekid hacha lo pekid. And Rav Nachman says no. When you're moving a splinter, that's extraneous. That's embedded into your skin. Therefore, it's not called repair. It's like something external from you that you're taking off. But when it comes to repairing the body, something which is not merely embedded, but it's actually part of the body. This is your body. Your body's out of shape. To reshape the body is going to be usher on Shabbos. Okay. Fine, let's go further. Next Mishnah. A cane for turning over olives. If it has a knot at the end of a knot, like as a stick, and there's a knot at the end of the stick, then it's going to be it's mekabel tuma. And if it doesn't have a knot at the top, it's not susceptible to tuma. Either way, whether it has a knot or not, it is movable on Shabbos. It's not muksa. Ask the Gemara, why is it that if it has a knot on it, it's susceptible to tuma? Pshutikli eitz in mekabel tuma. My time adum nistak beinan. So the Gemara asks that when the Torah talks about tuma, it says that it has to be something similar to a sack. A sack is something which has a receptacle. It's able to hold things. So if something is flat, it's not mekabel tuma. So it has to have a receptacle. So the cane for turning over olives, right? They basically put olives into a big vat and they would turn them over to see if they're ready to be pressed. The first stage, they just leave them in a vat. They would just like disintegrate a little bit, and then they turn them over with that stick to see if they're ready. So the Gemara is asking, the stick is flat. If the stick is flat, it should not be mekabel tuma. Why did the Mishnah say if it has a knot at the top, it's mekabel tuma? No, when it has a knot on top, then actually has a little groove, and that little groove picks up a little bit of oil, so it's not just completely flat, it does have a little bit of a groove, and therefore it is mekabel tuma. Next Mishnah. All utensils can be moved on Shabbos except for a large saw and a coulter. We'll see why. This launderer's riddle is similar to a coulter and is therefore muktzah. Okay, with the launderer's riddle, basically back in the day when we have like good smells in our laundry. Back in the day, they did laundry with like foul smelling stuff. So how would they make the laundry smell good? They would leave it on this metal thing called a riddle, and they would put incense under it, and that way the incense would cause a nice smell to go into the clothing. So this is something which is seen as something very special. Again, this goes back to the concept of muktzah machmetz chisar kis. It's items which a person is very concerned about in terms of it getting ruined, and therefore it becomes muksa that you can't use it on Shabbos. It's a different category of muksa. You can't use it for a permitted purpose. So the saw and the coulter, the large saw and the coulter, which are mentioned in the Mishnah, and now Rav Nachman's adding the launderer's riddle. The tanner's knife is and a butcher's knife, a carpenter's also knife, also similar to a coulter and our muksa. Anything which certainly professionals, they have their own items which they don't want people to mess around with. Those are muksa machmas chisar and kis. Okay, so as we'll see, there are different stages of muksa. First, originally, the rabbis were very concerned. People were not keeping Shabbos seriously. So powerful insight over here. So what do you do? People are not taking things seriously. So there's one school of thought which says, okay, make more leniencies to make sure that it's able to be kept. Another school of thought says, no, make things more stringent. People see it's serious. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, of blessed memory, said that he observed that Pesach and Yom Kippur are the two most widely observed holidays. People who don't keep Shabbos fast on Yom Kippur. People who don't eat kosher will have a kosher home on Pesach. What's the deal? You would think that it's the easy holidays that people keep. No. Clearly, when they grew up saying this is so important, then it really makes a rosh, it makes an impression. And that's what our sages were doing over here. They said, people are not taking Shabbos seriously, so we're not going to make more leniencies, we're going to make more stringencies. And so we're shown in the first stage of the stringencies, the only 3 utensils are allowed to be moved on Shabbos. The knife used for cutting a cake or of pressed figs. A ladle used for skimming foam off a pot. A small table knife. That's it. And they were doing so in order to impress upon people. Shabbos is a real deal. You can't be so lenient. However, as things Baruch Hashem progressed in the right direction, they further permitted, and they further permitted. Okay, 3 stages are permitted. We're going to see what those are. Until they finally said, all utensils can be moved, except for a large saw and a coulter. That's the final stage, the stage that we live in, which is that the only things that are really full-fledged muksa are going to be these klish muksa machmas chisar and kis, and we'll see muksa machmas gufo, certain unique things, but most things, even things that are somewhat muksa, we're going to have some permissible way of moving them. So the Gemara asks, what are the 3 stages? First, they permitted taking something that's used primarily for permitted work for the sake of its use. Okay, meaning anything, whatever, like a chair. A chair was muksa, right? And they said, okay, you're allowed to use it now for its own use. Then they said I can move a chair not only to sit on it, but if I want to put something down over here, I'm allowed to move the chair out of the way for its place. Then they permitted things which are normally prohibited, like a hammer, for a use, meaning I can use the hammer to break a nut, but I can't use it for the sake of its place. It was only permitted to move these utensils with one hand, but not with 2 hands, because that's too much exertion. Until they came along finally and said, all utensils can be moved on Shabbos, even if they were taken with 2 hands, again, except for this large saw or the coulter. Okay, Amalei Rava. Rava says, it says they permitted. When something is permitted, it means both. For the sake of its usage and for the sake of its place. Therefore Rava interprets the 3 stages differently. The first stage, they said, a chair, which is a klish machla heter, can be used whether it's for sitting on it or whether it's for the place. And then they said a chair also, if let's say I have a chair sitting outside, it's going to rain, and this chair is going to get ruined in the rain, I'm also allowed to move it inside. Okay? And then they went ahead and they said a hammer can be moved, whether I want to use it for breaking nuts, whether I want to use it because it's in my way, but I can't move the hammer to protect it from the rain. Okay? And it was permitted something that can be carried by one person, but not by 2 people. Until they said all objects can be moved on Shabbos, even if it's moved by 2 people. So basically, bottom line is the major difference over here is about a klish l'achal iser. Is it allowed to be moved l'tzorach mekomo? Okay, so everyone agrees that klish l'achal iser, a hammer. Let's say you left your hammer outside. I'm not allowed to move it in to protect it from the elements. Okay, but I am allowed to move it. Everyone agrees I'm allowed to move it if I'm using the hammer for breaking nuts. The machlokas is, can I move the hammer if I need the place? Let's say I left the hammer on the chair. Can I move the hammer away because I want to sit there? Rava says yes. Abaye says no. Abaye asked the question on Rava's approach. The garlic mortar, it's only allowed to move if it has garlic in it, because then it's butzel to the garlic. And the garlic is the thing you're carrying, even though it's in a mortar. But if it has nothing in there, it's a klish machla iser, you can't move it. So hachmai skinan. So what's the question? So Rava would say, Abaye would say, it's not a question on me, because because basically we're talking about a case where it's sitting on a chair and I'm not allowed to move it for that reason. Rabbi would say, no problem to me. We're talking about a case where it's sitting outside and I want to protect it from the elements. I would also agree that Klish Malach Isser does have certain scenarios where it's going to be forbidden to move. Eisvei, we have another question. Rabbi V'Shavin, both V'Shavin still agree. Shem Kitz V'la Basar Shas L'Tazlo. You're not allowed to move the pestle. It's a klish malach l'isser. I can't move it. So Abaye would say, for me, it means I can't move it because I need its place. I want to use the counter. I can't move it. But you, according to Rav, what are you going to say? We're also talking about moving it from the sun to the shade, and that's why it is permitted. That's why it's forbidden. Amar Rav Chanina, this Mishnah, meaning the first level of the most stringent view was in the time of Nechemia ben Chachaliah. It says in the pasuk, on those days where Isi v'huda dorchem gitos v'Shabbos v'vim v'aremos, people were pressing wine vats on Shabbos. They're bringing the heaps from the fields. They were doing everything wrong, and that's why they added all these stringencies. Amar Rav Elazar, kanem maklos glostra meducha, the tube, staff, knob, and mortar, kula kodam mataras kelim nishnu. There are a bunch of mishnahs which teach certain prohibitions with the shulchan. The shulchan is with the place where they put the bread, the showbread that was used in the base of Mikdash, in the Mishkan. There were different things that held it up. All those mishnayos have certain prohibitions. Says Rabbi Lazar, those mishnayos which have those prohibitions were all in the first stage before they allowed utensils to be moved like they are today. Let's see what those mishnayos are. Kanim, the tubes. Design says the Mishnah Losider Kanim Shabbos. The movements of the tubes. The tubes basically they had 12 loaves of bread. You had tubes in between to separate the breads just a tiny bit. So you're not allowed to move them on Shabbos. Okay, so he's saying that Mishnah was taught before. Not in the current era, not in the modern era. They were taught when we were very strict about muksa. But now that we have the regular rulings, he would say you're allowed to move them out. Maklos, what's the staffs? It's not maklos zaken chalak ma'isham munichal seifa v'akes v'chavero v'tolo mafshit. So basically on when they would on Erev Pesach, what they would do is that Erev Pesach, everyone comes to shach their Karban Pesach in the Mishkan or the base of Mikdash, in the base of Mikdash, in the Azara, and then they would have to skin the animal. So how would they do so? So normally there's a couple of hooks on the wall of the base of Mikdash, but there's thousands of people there slaughtering animals and not enough hooks. So basically they would have these staffs. I would put one on my shoulder, you'd put one on your shoulder, and we put hang the animal in between, and then you would slaughter, then you would flay it, you would skin it. Rabbi Lezer Omer, Arba Asar Shechal Yis B'Shabbos, if the 14th falls on Shabbos, then you don't do that. Rather, Maniach Yado Al-Kes V'Chaver V'Yad Chavero Al-Kseifa V'Tol Mafshit, then what we do is we don't use the stick. The stick is muksa, and rather I put my hand out, you put your hand out, and we hang the animal on our hand. So that, says Rabbi Eliezer, is talking about this was taught specifically before what's it called? Before the at the earliest stage when everything was we were very machmir about muksa. Okay, good. Glostra, knob, it's not neger sheish brosha glostra, a bolt that has a knob on its end. You're allowed to drag from this door and hang it on another one on Shabbos. Omer, it's like all utensils, can be moved within a courtyard. A medocha, regarding mortar, hada amran. Okay, like we mentioned, the mortar with the garlic in it. Okay, Amar Rabba. Rabba says no proof from any of these cases that we're talking about in a situation where we're very machmer. Maybe it's really being taught in the modern era where we have the leniencies of muksa. Mimai. Like who says? Right, meaning maybe all these mishnayos were taught at a later stage. Okay, now we'll go through each one. Why is it that the Mishnah said you can't move the tubes which hold up the bread? The reason you want to move them is because there's a concern of the bread decaying, and then there was the reason you want to put them in there is because the bread may decay. The tube helps a tiny bit, but it's not really necessary, and therefore it's not that it's not that it was in the earlier stage when we're very machmer muksa. Rather, it's at the current stage. The reason we're not allowed to move it is because it's such an insignificant help, and therefore it's still muksa. Maklos, the staffs, efshir kabelazar. The reason that the Mishnah said that it says you have to use the staffs. There's no need to take them because you could always do like Rabbi Lazar says. In other words, the reason that you can't use the staffs is because we always have the option of Rabbi Lazar who says you could always put it on your shoulders and therefore the staff should not be used. Glostra, the knob, we're talking about not because of muksa, but rather we're talking about a case of carrying. The issue is that we're talking about a chatzar which is not doesn't have an eruv. Yeshua holds that who holds that you're only allowed to drag it is because it's in the doorway. In the doorway, he holds like the interior of the house. Mana devata mechatzer, and it's like you're removing something from a door from inside a house into a courtyard. Rabbi Tarfon holds you're allowed to move it normally is because he treats the doorway like it's already outside. And you're carrying something from within a chutzner to outside a chutzner. The reason in the case of medocha, the mortar, it's forbidden to move unless there's garlic in there is because we hold like Rav Nechemia, who has that stringency, who says only utensils, only allowed to use for its permitted purpose. We will do that last Amud sometime a little bit later. I'm going to stop over here. Have a wonderful day.